Today I want to talk about the kings of the Catuvellauni tribe. Now, there's a reason I want to talk about the kings of the Catuvellauni tribe, and that's because in the Mabinogion there is a character called Cadwalon, and Cadwalon is believed to be the historical king of the Catuvellauni, Cassivellaunus. So this opens up an historical context to compare the mythology of the Mabinogi with the actual historical record. So before we begin this discussion, I think we should first look at the two houses that are represented in the Mabinogi. And they are the House of Don and the House of Lur. And they're sometimes referred to as the children of Don and the children of Lur. Now, they represent the kings of the north and the kings of the south. So the House of Don represents the kings of Gwynedd, and the House of Lur represents the kings of David. So for this discussion, we'll be focusing on the House of Don, and in particular the children of Beli, who is the consort of Don. The Beli we're looking at here is not the historical god Beli. This is the ancestor figure of Beli Mawr, who is a mythological figure and may have been based on the god Beli, or he may have been an historical figure who took the name as a follower of the cult of Beli. In this discussion, we're interested in two of Beli's sons, the first, Nuth, and the second, Cadwalon. Now, as I've said, Cadwalon is believed to be the historical figure Cassivellaunus, and Cassivellaunus is known to us through his battle, or through the fact that he was the leader of the British armies opposing Caesar's second conquest of Britain in 54 BC. So now let's look at the succession of the kings of the Catuvellauni, and we'll start with Cassivellaunus, or as he is in the mythological record, Cadwalon. Now, Cadwalon and Nuth were brothers, and their father was Beli Mawr. And what we can see on this chart is that Beli Mawr was allegedly, through the mythological record, the king of Britain. And when he died, his throne passed to his son Nuth. But when Nuth died, his son Catuvellaunus was too young to take the throne. And so he was made Duke of Cornwall, and Cassivellaunus was made the king. But when Cassivellaunus died, the throne reverted back to Cassivellaunus. We know of Cassivellaunus through Caesar's commentary on the Gallic Wars, but Cassivellaunus, on the other hand, is a different matter. We only know of Cassivellaunus through the coins that he issued. We do know that he became king of the Catuvellauni in around 20 BC. And we know that he was issuing coins from what is now modern-day St. Albans. But then, at around 15 to 10 BC, he started issuing coins from what is now modern-day Colchester, which at the time was the territory of the Trinovantes. So this tells us that he had become the dominant leader within the area and was for all intents and purposes the king of the Trinovantes, or at least the overlord king of the Trinovantes, as well as the Catuvellauni. And then a little later, he started issuing coins again from St. Albans, bearing the markings Ricon, meaning he was the great ruler and the divine and legitimate king. Now, I've heard different opinions on the name Canubelinus. I've seen some that say it meant strong as a dog, whereas others believe it meant hound of belly. Either way, Canubelinus was seen as a powerful king by the Romans, so much so that he was allowed to print the words or the Latin rex on his coins, which means that Augustus, who was the Roman emperor at the time, saw him as a client king of Britain. So after the death of Canubelinus in around AD 40, it seems there is some contention as to whether the throne passed to the two brothers, Togidumus and Caractacus, or whether it was passed down to Tognadumus, and after Tognadumus died, and he died during a battle fighting Claudius's invasion in 43 AD. And when he died, we know that Caractacus was leading the resistance, and it had now fallen into a situation where it wasn't one army against another, it was a resistance. So Caractacus now found himself as the leader of a resistance movement rather than a king of the tribes of Britain leading the armies of Britain. He was now having to fight Claudius and Claudius's troops using guerrilla warfare. Now you could do a whole video on Caractacus just by himself, and I'm sure there are many out there. But the short form is that Caractacus was eventually betrayed and was handed over to the Romans, and he was taken back to Rome and paraded, something the Romans often did when they were victorious, was to revel in their victory by parading the chiefs and kings of the losing battles through the streets of Rome. Now, what exactly was planned for Caractacus at the end of that was probably execution, but Caradog gave an inspiring speech. So inspiring, in fact, that he was applauded and he was given status within Rome, and he was allowed to live out his days with his family in comfort in Rome. So that's the lineage of the kings of the Catuvellauni. But this video is about contrasting the mythology with the historical record. So to do that, let's just go back to basics and understand exactly what a myth is. So a myth may be considered as an allegorical story. So that's a story that contains hidden values, and myths teach us of the past and how things came to be, and they also provide a mechanism through storytelling to teach the culture, the values, beliefs, and the norms of a society. So a myth is not attempting to lay down an accurate historical record. It's attempting to teach us about our culture, our past, our values, and as they are generally handed down through oral tradition, you can't expect the historical record to be intact, and so we've got this situation in mythology where stories are told to teach us about values and morality, and they explain things of the past, but they are not an accurate historical record and are not meant to be. So we can see that the Mabinogion fits very well into this idea of mythology. It does tell us about our culture, and it tells us about our values, and it tells us about some of the belief systems. And so the tales that come to us through the Mabinogion are extremely extremely important documents. They tell us a little of pre-Roman values and beliefs, but we must bear in mind that these tales were passed down through oral transmission, and it wasn't until the 11th and 12th centuries that some of these tales were actually written down, and then a number of these tales were documented in the Red Book of Hergest and the White Book of Rudderich. And the White Book of Rudderich, it's believed, was compiled around the mid-14th century, while the Red Book of Hergest was compiled in the late 14th and early 15th centuries. And so, although these books were based on earlier tales that maybe relate back to the pre-Roman invasion of Britain, or even the beginnings of Britain itself, then we must understand that they were written in the context of medieval Britain. And so, they're not only important insofar as they have glimmers of information in regards to way people thought and the lifestyles and the values and the culture of pre-Roman Britain. It also tells us about the time when these stories were written down, and a lot can be learned of the medieval period from the Mabinogi. But what does the Mabinogi tell us about the kings of Britain, or the topic of this video, the kings of the Catuvellauni? Well, let's go back to the two houses I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the House of Don and the House of Lur. And I said the House of Don represents the kings of Gwynedd, the kings of the north, and the House of Lur represents the kings of the south and of David. Now, in the Mabinogi, the kings of the south, the children of Lur, which consist of Bran the Blessed, Manawadden, and their sister Branwen. And the part that concerns us is that Bran goes off to fight a war in Ireland, but he loses his life in Ireland, and there's a big story about the head of Bran and how it was brought back to Britain. But he loses his life in Ireland, and his brother Manawadden brings back the head to Britain. But he's to find out that he is not the successor to the throne, because while Bran, who was the king of Britain, was in Ireland, the throne was seized by Cadwalon, and Cadwalon is the Cassivellaunus, or believed to be the Cassivellaunus of the Catuvellauni tribe. So, the whole thing doesn't meld together completely, because the Catuvellauni tribe doesn't really merge with what we would think of as the kings of Gwynedd. But this is what I was saying with mythology. There are nuggets of truth. And it's these nuggets of truth that we have to sift out and compare it with other bits of the historical record, the archaeological record, the narrative record. And by comparing this information, we're able to get closer to the truth. And so in this instance, we have perhaps an historical record that they remember that Cassivellaunus, who in the Welsh has become Cadwalon, they remember that he seized the throne. In fact, Cassivellaunus conquered Trinovantum, or the tribe of the Trinovantes, and he grew his power as king there. But in the mythological record, it now seems to be merged in that, yes, there was a king before, but he was fighting in Ireland, and while he was there, Cadwalon seized the throne and now was the king of Britain. And so now we can see how mythology can hand down some real nuggets of truth if we're prepared to take those stories and compare and contrast it against the other evidence that we have. And it's the comparing and contrasting of the available information to create or get us closer to the truth. And this is the puzzle that we must solve if we want to understand more of the values and belief systems of the past.